Hello, my name is Italia, and I'm an aerospace engineer at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And some things about me, I'm from Burlington, New Jersey, and here's my brother and my dog. And some of my hobbies are kickboxing and soccer.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Venn. I am also an aero engineer student at RPI and I'm from Ottawa in Canada. My hobbies are hockey and anything outdoorsy and sporty. Now, I'd like you guys all to think of a moment where you were driving in a car either with your parent or your family, any type of family member, and something happened that was frustrating for you or the person driving. And the first thing that comes to mind for me personally is traffic and how frustrating it is just to sit in it. And today we will be talking about an alternate way that engineers are trying to invent or create to get away from traffic and go towards urban air mobility, which is flying cars. Now, you might think that this is way too futuristic and impossible, but there has been a couple of examples where flying cars have appeared in movies and TV shows. Now, thinking of some examples, the first one that comes to mind for me is Back to the Future. There's also the Magic School Bus and Star Wars that are big ones. And this concept of urban air mobility is how engineers are trying to make these fictional flying vehicles into reality. So we'll be talking about urban air mobility today, and like I said before, I'm Emily, and Italia is there with me, and we're talking about how engineers are creating this new way of transportation to bring people from the cities to the suburb areas through the means of flying car. Our presentation is separated into three parts. The first one being urban air mobility, the second one, lift, trust, and drag, and the last part, the pros and cons of urban air mobility. Our first topic today is, what is air mobility? Now, urban air mobility is the theoretical name for what is going to be flying cars. It is the future of transportation and mostly its modernization, and it's how people from the city will be able to get home from work after long days, but not on cars or on roads, but through the skies and up and above. It's the concept where traffic will be avoided and people will be flown out in a greener way than what would be gas emitting cars. There are a few types of engineers needed to make these flying cars. So the first ones would be aero engineers, which are responsible for the aerodynamics of the planes, making sure it's able to fly and stay up in the sky and not fall down. Then there is also the mechanical engineers who are responsible for the motors and the engines of the car and making sure it runs. And then there's also electrical engineers, and they're responsible for making sure all the systems of the car work together as a whole.
So, one flying car currently being sold is the Terrafugia Transition, which can fly and drive. The problem is that it needs a runway to take off, which takes away a lot of the appeal and convenience of a flying car. Flying cars will become more popular when we're capable of having a car that can have vertical takeoff, like a hovercraft, but this technology is still being developed. And many rules, investment, and time would need to be made to make flying cars mainstream.
If we look at the screen right now, these are examples of flying cars currently being sold in 2022. As we can see, all 5 of these models are very different one from the next, and mostly it's due because these are all developed by private companies, as there isn't one fixed kind of go-to model that is affordable to make and everything, and mostly because the technologies for this are still being developed and not finalized yet. All of these cars still require a horizontal takeoff like Italia was taking, so they still take off like this, and the main goal of urban air mobility is to be able to lift up like straight up and kind of go up and over, which would be best for in-city landing and takeoffs. And now that we talked about what urban air mobility, the questions that engineers are trying to answer is how we can make cars fly.
So our second topic is explaining the different concepts involved in flying, including lift, thrust, and drag. So first we'll start with Newton's second law, which is a very important equation in physics. Newton's second law is F equals ma. And F stands for force, N stands for mass, which is the amount of matter in an object, and A stands for acceleration, which is how fast something speeds up. So F equals ma is important because it shows the relationship between forces and motion. It allows you to calculate the acceleration and therefore velocity and position of an object, which would be important if you are going to design a flying car. So this, for example, this formula tells us that the amount an airplane accelerates is equal to the applied force divided by the mass of the airplane. As you can see with the car in the picture, when you hit the gas pedal, it goes faster because you applied a force. Similarly with the baseball player, the ball is hit with more force and goes farther because he swung the bat with more acceleration. So now that we've talked about Newton's second law, we can talk about the fundamental forces of aerodynamics, or what makes a plane fly. So first we have lift, which is an upward force that makes the plane go up. That's caused by a difference in air pressure along the wings. Then we have gravity, which pulls it down, coming from the center of the earth. Thrust moves the aircraft forward and creates airspeed, and that comes from the engines. And drag acts against the airplane and pulling it back. And that can be caused by things like air. So the main thing you need to know is that lift must be more than gravity or the plane will fall. And thrust has to be more than drag for the plane to go forward. So as shown by the arrows, you can see which condition has to be higher for the plane to go forward, backward, up, or down. So to make true flying cars, we need vertical takeoff, which means no runway is needed to get the aircraft in the air, like shown in this GIF. And electric-powered vertical takeoff was first achieved in 2020 in Japan. A more advanced car was created in 2021 in Canada. There are weight and height restrictions for people to fly the car. The driver must be 18 years or older and take a training course to fly it, and it also can only be flown in rural or country areas. And the company is working on improving vertical takeoff to accommodate more people's weights.
The last topic of discussion is the pros and cons that urban mobility brings to our lives. The first pro is how convenient urban air mobility would be for everyone's lives. Urban air mobility would reduce traffic as there'd be more of a flow of direct routes for people to take home, and it would reduce the density of people leaving the city, which would make for just a more convenient way home. The second positive point of urban air mobility is how time-saving it would be for everyone coming back home. These flying cars would be faster than regular cars, and they would also have a more direct route to the suburbs with less traffic. which would make for a lot of time saved. And time is money, as a lot of people say. It's more time that parents could spend with their kids at home instead of sitting in traffic. The last point about urban air mobility that is the positive is how green this technology could become. This is still being developed, which means there's the possibility for it to be green energy and less dangerous and bad for our planet, which means it would be better. It'd be more fuel efficient as less people would be driving their cars, and there would be less gas emission. And so the flying cars bring the possibility to make a greener world. Now, I'd like you all to close your eyes and pretend you're at the beach, just sitting, and you hear the whoosh and the calmness of the waves running around. But then suddenly, there's this big buzzing sound that just goes right over your head. And you kind of wake up with a startle, and you're like, what was that, right? This is something I've seen before, and I know probably a lot of you have heard about, but drones. And drones are very small, miniature type of flying vehicles, and a flying car would be a lot, like 10 times or more the size of it, and it would make a lot more noise. And that is one of the concerns engineers have to take into considerations when they think about building flying cars.
So now we'll talk about the cons of flying cars, or the reasons that they aren't popular yet. One reason being noise pollution. So it would be noisy for people on the ground, and especially people in skyscrapers. So NASA, Boeing, and other companies were working on a commercial supersonic plane, or in other words, a really fast plane. And the main reason it's not in public use right now is because of the noise from sonic booms that bothered people in residential areas or suburbs. So noise level is actually a main consideration. Another thing to think about is how expensive it would be to mass produce this invention and create air infrastructure and rules for people to be able to use them. So some rules to think about are who would be allowed to buy or use these vehicles. Would it only be taxi drivers or everyday drivers? Would taxi drivers need to have specially designed flight lessons? Would there be a new age limit to drive/buy these cars? Would there also need to be rules like a minimum and maximum altitude the cars can fly at, or specific zones like air roads that they can go through? And for infrastructure, would these flying cars need runways to take off? And what about parking? Would the top of skyscrapers be used as flying car parking lots like in this picture? So the biggest con is safety, because crashes would be much deadlier for people in the vehicles and people on the ground. Some things to think about are, how would we prevent crashes from becoming even deadlier to people on the ground? Would we create barriers or nets to protect people on the street? Would there be an escape option in the event of a crash or failure for people in the car, like a parachute or ejector seat? And what happens to the car if it runs out of fuel? Will it just fall out of the sky like this car? So the cons tell us why we haven't made flying cars a reality yet. So looking back, having talked about what makes a car fly and the pros and cons that come with it, how do you think flying cars can become a reality? And you guys are the future, so you can help us figure out how to make flying cars available for everyone.
Thank you so much. Hope you guys have a nice day.